PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. And on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub, we are going to be saying goodbye to a member of the Vegas Golden Knights organization, as Brayden Pachal has been claimed on waivers by the Calgary Flames. And I know that he was a newer and not really well-known member of the Vegas Golden Knights. He only played in select games in the NHL. But for a guy like Brayden Pachal, his story is very fascinating. The fact that he was not only an undrafted free agent and someone who signed with the Vegas Golden Knights organization, but this is somebody who spent 5 seasons in the organization, and he did play 29 games in the NHL for the Vegas Golden Knights. So since he was a member of this team, I wanted to do this goodbye episode and pretty much talk about Brayden Pachal's tenure with your Vegas Golden Knights organization. So this is going to be a very fun episode, and I'm looking forward to all of this here on PRConnectionsRadio.com. Now, to start this out, I'm going to provide context. So we're going to go from the very beginning. Now, with Brayden Pachal, he a defenseman, from 26-year-old defenseman. He's 6'2", around 200 pounds, but he is somebody from Saskatchewan. And when it comes to Brayden Pachal, his junior career, he actually spent 4 seasons in the Western Hockey League. He spent 2 seasons with the Victoria Royals, and then he spent parts of 3 seasons with the Prince Albert Raiders. Now, the reason why I stated that way is that in year 2 of his junior hockey career, he spent half the year in Victoria before being traded and being sent over to Prince Albert for that 16-17 season. Now, with the Victoria Royals, he only spent 75 games with them, had 1 goal, 8 assists for 9 points, but he did rack up around 70 penalty minutes during that time. I do want to say that Hockey DB is my reference for that one there. And when it came to Brayden Pachal, something very interesting about this is that the Victoria Royals actually made the playoffs in the first season that he was in juniors in that 2016 Western Hockey League playoffs. Now, that year that he did make it there, they would end up getting bounced in the second round. So they beat Spokane in the first round and then lost to Kelowna in the second round in that 2015-2016 season. He did play in 12 playoff games in that tenure with the Victoria Royals. Now, after that trade, he would spend parts of 3 seasons with Prince Albert, and he steadily got better every single year in almost every category. So he went from playing 30 games in his first year with Prince Albert with 3 goals and 12 points. Hockey DB is my reference there. And then year 2 in 17-18, this is where he really picked up momentum. He would play in just under 70 games, would have half a dozen goals, just under 20 assists for 26 points. But the very important thing for the Prince Albert Raiders is that he would pick up 100 penalty minutes that season, and they would make the playoffs that year. And in 7 games, he would pick up a goal during the Western Hockey League playoffs. But, and this is from the Western Hockey League's website, in the 2018 Western Hockey League playoffs, they would end up getting bounced in the first round as they would lose to Moose Jaw in the first round. And 2018-2019, his final season playing juniors, this is when all of his stats ended up becoming the best performance and the best of that tenure, as not only would he make the All-Star team in 2019, he was named to the second All-Star team, but in just over 65 games played, he would rack up an astounding 15 goals, pick up 51 points, and 110 penalty minutes on the year for the Prince Albert Raiders. And, this would be a 2019 situation where he was on that all-star team, everything there. But what's interesting is that he actually would be with some notable names on that all-star team. His teammate, Ian Scott, who would end up being with the Toronto Maple Leafs, they would draft him in the 2017 NHL draft. And you also had Jet Wu, who, prospect with the Vancouver Canucks, and Brandon Hagel, who, for anybody who recognizes that name, well, you should, because he has been a very solid member of the Chicago Blackhawks and Tampa Bay Lightning throughout his career. So very interesting how in the Western Hockey League, he made the all-second team. I also do want to briefly mention that there was a Vegas Golden Knight who was on the first team that year in Cody Glass. But that 2019 season, the Prince Albert Raiders, they had a very talented team. Now, from the Prince Albert Raiders, this is their kind of alumni page, their historical page. In that 2019 season, they would have future NHLers, as they would have Noah Gregor, you would have Brett Lazon, and you would even have Parker Kelly. So there was some good up-and-coming NHL players who were on this team. Ozzy Wasblatt, he would be there, San Jose Sharks and National San Jose Sharks kind of guy. And then you also had Zachary Hayes, who, funny enough, would become his teammate in the AHL with the Henderson Silver Knights. He was on that team. I mentioned Ian Scott just a little bit ago because he was on that all WHL team. But there was a lot of good talent for the Prince Albert Raiders that year as they entered the 2019 Western Hockey League playoffs. And for the playoffs that year, they would end up having a very good playoff run. As the number 1 seed in the East, Prince Albert would sweep Red Deer in the first round, would move over to the second round and beat Saskatoon in the second round, and then would move on to the Edmonton Oil Kings in the conference finals. They would beat the Edmonton Oil Kings and then would move on to the Western Hockey League Championship. And in a 7-game grueling series, they would beat Vancouver. So very interesting how in that situation, they beat the Vancouver Giants in the Western Hockey League Championship. This is a Vancouver team that had a future NHLer in Bowen Byram as like their main player on that organization. And for the Western Hockey League that year, all the awards and everything that was established, Brayden Pachal would pick up some hardware in the Western Hockey League Championship, as he would end up getting the WHL Plus Minus Award, which was given to the player with the best plus minus rating in the Western Hockey League. So Brayden Pachal would get that accomplishment. And as they would win the Western Hockey League Championship, the Prince Albert Raiders, they would not be done, as since you win the Western Hockey League and the fact that you get a berth in the Memorial Cup, they would not be done here, as the 2019 Memorial Cup, they would end up being in that situation, and they would be in the tournament to establish the best junior hockey team in the world. And the Prince Albert Raiders would come in 4th. They would not win any of these games in the tournament, but the fact that they were there was incredible. The Halifax Mooseheads, they ended up winning the championship and actually ended up being the best team of that situation. Now, what's interesting about this tournament is that you would have future Vegas Golden Knights members like Danny Chaka. He would be on that. He would be in this tournament. Nick Suzuki, who the Vegas Golden Knights drafted, he would be on those rosters. You also ended up having players, for example, that like Noah Dobson, who's become a real established, NHLer with the New York Islanders. And you also ended up having somebody that would end up being a really good player in Raphael Lavoie, who's, been doing very well at the Edmonton Oilers. He's kind of been building himself up there with the Oilers organization. So this was just really interesting looking at the rosters and everything. Now, as my reference for this, I actually went and looked at the Memorial Cup because they do have a website for the Memorial Cup. So that's actually what I used there. CHLMemorialCup.Canada was my reference. So that is the end of his junior career for Brayden Pachal. And I do want to mention that with this career, he also would be named captain of the Prince Albert Raiders when they won the Western Hockey League Championship. So he's bringing all of this knowledge and all of this leadership to Prince Albert. Very good for Brayden Pachal. I like what we saw from him from his junior career. And throughout that junior career, now obviously this is kind of, not going to be as many points as most people are, but I want to show you what his stats were with Prince Albert in that 3 seasons here on Vegas Hockey Hub. I'm going to pull it up right now. So I want to keep in mind, once again, it's with just the Prince Albert Raiders, but 160 games, 25 goals, just under 65 assists, 489 points in his career. And, like I said, the final year, he was the team captain of the Prince Albert Raiders. A whopping 250 penalty minutes. So he was not afraid of the physicality as a defenseman. And then look at that plus minus. I did mention that he did pick up some hardware as the winner of the best plus minus in the 2018-2019 season. And Brayden Pachal finished his career with a plus 65 with the Prince Albert Raiders. So, man, that's a real good number there. The fact that you have a plus 65 as a defenseman, and that was with the Prince Albert Raiders. And I didn't want to include this because it would, kind of make it more difficult. But in the Western Hockey League playoffs, Brayden Pachal played in 30 games with the Prince Albert Raiders, 2 goals, 10 assists, and he had 34 penalty minutes during that time. So for Brayden Pachal, that was what his tenure was. I use HockeyDB as my reference for the stats here. So the end of his junior hockey career is over, and he would head into the 2019 NHL draft. And he would end up becoming undrafted in the 2019 NHL draft. But for Brayden Pachal, this is where his tenure with the Vegas Golden Knights would begin, as Brayden Pachal would sign an entry-level contract with your Vegas Golden Knights. And I am using the archived article that the Vegas Golden Knights did for Brayden Pachal, as he would end up, being signed to an entry-level contract in that 2019, or just before 2019-2020 season, and they would send him over to the AHL. And what is interesting about Brayden Pachal is that his first season being a member of the Chicago Wolves, getting himself situated with the AHL, he would play in just under 50 games that year. He would get 1 goal, 9 assists for 10 points, and would rack up 40 penalty minutes in his first campaign with the Chicago Wolves. Now, this is the 2019-2020 season, the year, after the Chicago Wolves had very successful run in the Western Hockey League, in the AHL playoffs with the Kelly Cup and the Calder Cup and everything there. But with Brayden Pachal being in the AHL with Chicago Wolves, they would not make the Calder Cup playoffs that year. Like I mentioned, during the first 2 seasons of the AHL Chicago Wolves tenure, they lost in the AHL Calder Cup finals. The Calder Cup finals between Charlotte and Chicago. They actually made it to the Calder Cup finals, and they would lose to Charlotte in that second year. Brayden Pachal is not part of that roster. This is the year afterwards. But, his first season, you're playing in just around 50 games. That is good to, kind of build yourself up. And they actually did something during this time where they even sent him down to the ECHL at one point, and he played around 5 games with the Fort Wayne Comets, who were the ECHL affiliate of the Vegas Golden Knights at that time, and he had half a point per game in that small stint in the ECHL. But that's his first season, and, he's really building himself up and everything like that. But something big happened in the Vegas Golden Knights organization in that offseason, as in 2020, while the whole pandemic and everything that is going on, the Vegas Golden Knights were no longer the Chicago Wolves. And instead, they bought the San Antonio Rampage and turned it into the Henderson Silver Knights. And what ended up making this a big deal is that Brayden Pachal really established himself with the Henderson Silver Knights, as in the 3 seasons he would be in Henderson. Not only would he make himself captain, get to the level of being a captain in the AHL and with the Henderson Silver Knights in 2022, 2023, but during those 3 seasons, he would play in just over 100 games during that run. And here's what his stats were. I'm using HockeyDB as my reference here. In 2020, 2021, the Henderson Silver Knights, who had one of the best records in the AHL, he would play in 24 games, have 2 goals and 7 assists. And then in the playoffs that year, he played in just 5 of those games and did rack up 2 points. Now, in 2020, in 2021, 2022, coming off of that 2020-2021 campaign, he would end up being a full-time member of the Henderson Silver Knights. He would play in 65 games, have 2 goals and 9 assists, but he did rack up 90 penalty minutes. So that aggressiveness and that physical style, that did not change from his Western Hockey League days. 90 penalty minutes there. And he did not pick up any points in just the 2 playoff games for the Silver Knights in the 2022 Calder Cup playoffs. But here is something that did happen. In that final year of him being in the AHL for 22-23, despite being named captain, as you see the C on his logo there, Brayden Pachal ended up doing something very interesting. As before making it to the roster with the NHL, with the Vegas Golden Knights, he would be named to the All-Star game for the Henderson Silver Knights, would be their representative. And that season, in 55 games played, he would have a trio of goals, and he'd have 12 assists and 90 penalty minutes for the second year in a row to end his tenure with Henderson. Now, his AHL stats with the Chicago Wolves / Henderson Silver Knights, I want to put those up on the screen right here, because I do want to point out that he was a vital part of that AHL team in the 4 seasons that he spent with the Golden Knights organization. And, he, like I said, he spent 5 seasons with the Golden Knights organization, and 4 of those years was in Chicago / Henderson. So I'm going to put those stats on the screen right now. And with these stats here, they actually come from the AHL's website itself. So just under 200 games in the AHL. He had 8 goals, 35 assists for 43 career points, and well over 200 penalty minutes in his AHL career, and a plus-minus of +5. So, compared to the 65 plus that he had in the Western Hockey League, it doesn't look that great in comparison, but still, he had a positive plus-minus in around 200 games in the AHL. But with that part of his career being done, let's move over to the NHL side and the Vegas Golden Knights. As Brayden Pachal, he would actually end up making his debut with the Vegas Golden Knights organization, as he would be on March 15th, 2022. Brayden Pachal would make his debut. As the Vegas Golden Knights, they would end up taking on the Winnipeg Jets. And even though it was a loss, the 22-year-old making his debut. Of course, you always want to have that moment, that first welcome to the NHL kind of situation with Brayden Pachal. he would end up playing in one more game that season in the 21-22 campaign, and the Vegas Golden Knights did not make the playoffs that year, so that was just the only 2 games he had that season. He did not pick up any goals, any assists, or any points that year. And then when he ends up being the captain, of the Henderson Silver Knights. He heads into free agency, coming off that entry-level contract that he had signed all those years ago. The Vegas Golden Knights and Brayden Pachal, they would end up signing a 1-year deal for him to remain with the Vegas Golden Knights. It was only $750,000, but for the 22-year-old, that means that he was going to stay with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. And despite him being, like I said, the captain of the Henderson Silver Knights during that time, he would end up being a partial member of the Vegas Golden Knights in that 2022-2023 season, as he would end up being a more impactful player during that campaign. So in 2022-2023, he would play in 10 NHL games and would have 2 assists but no goals during that time. Now, those 2 assists that he ended up having, I'm using Hockey Reference as my resource for this one. Those 2 assists, they would come up as the first one would end up being his first career point in the NHL, and that would be an assist from Riley. That would be an assist to Riley Smith against the Chicago Blackhawks, and that would be in that 22-23 season. And then he would actually make one more point, and that would be against the Los Angeles Kings. A couple of days later, he would have an assist on a Brayden McNabb goal. So he had 2 points during that situation. And during the playoffs that year, something very important happened for Brayden Pachal, as in the playoffs in 2023, the Vegas Golden Knights, they go all the way, they win the Stanley Cup, and he actually played a single game against the Winnipeg Jets in the first round. Now, he did not score any points during that time, but the fact that he was in the playoffs and was on the playoff roster for that game against the Winnipeg Jets. And I also want to mention that the Vegas Golden Knights have his name on the Stanley Cup. So because he was on the Stanley Cup roster and because he was requested by the Vegas Golden Knights to have his name on the Stanley Cup, Brayden Pachal is going to be one of those names that you're going to see on that Stanley Cup championship, be on the Stanley Cup itself. So that was very cool, the fact that he ended up being on that Stanley Cup championship roster. So after that 1-year contract with Brayden Pachal, he would end up signing a 2-year deal with the Vegas Golden Knights. He would get a 2-year contract extension. Now, reading this from the Vegas Golden Knights website itself, on June 28th, he signed a 2-year deal worth $775,000 annually per year. So that was a $25,000 bump from the contract before. Entering the 2023-2024 season, Brayden Pachal, he would play with the Vegas Golden Knights, would be in 17 games this year, and would pick up his first ever goal as a member of the Vegas Golden Knights, as he would score against the San Jose Sharks. And here's the photo of it right here. And after those 17 games of being in the NHL with the Vegas Golden Knights and picking up his first goal and his only point on the season, this would end up being the end of his tenure with the Vegas Golden Knights. As despite being on the opening day roster, despite him being on the NHL roster as a healthy scratch for majority of the season, the Vegas Golden Knights would put him on waivers on February 3rd. And unfortunately, the Calgary Flames would pick up Brayden Pachal, and he would be claimed by them. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward. Now, he was on a 2-year deal, so that means the Calgary Flames are going to have him for the upcoming season. He is going to be under contract with them for the upcoming year, and we'll see if the Calgary Flames have him be in more of a role moving forward. Now, I do want to mention what his stats were with Calgary at the end of the 23-24 season, as he would score 1 goal and 6 points in just under 35 games for Calgary. And this kind of gets to where the end of the video ends up being. And I do want to say to Brayden Pachal, I wish you the best of luck in Calgary. I hope that he does well. And we will have to wait and see how he does. Now, he's going to be in the division of the Vegas Golden Knights, so we are going to see Brayden Pachal very often and very frequently while he is with the Calgary Flames. But I want to kind of put his NHL stats of the Vegas Golden Knights up on here as we got to, like I said, the end of his tenure with the Vegas Golden Knights. So, as a member of the Vegas Golden Knights, he played in just 29 games in parts of 3 seasons. Well, in actuality, it was basically 2. Like I said, that first season, he just played 2 games with the Vegas Golden Knights, and that was at the end of the 21-22 season. He only had 1 goal, and that was with that was against the San Jose Sharks at the beginning of the 23-24 season. We did that recap show. In fact, watch all of our recap shows because we did all 82 games for this year. And he had that 1 goal, and then he had 2 assists from the year prior. So, I mean, look, 3 points in 29 games, that is something that not most people are going to be looking at. But the fact that he is a Stanley Cup champion with the Vegas Golden Knights, and he played in that 1 playoff game against Winnipeg is what matters. When it came to penalty minutes, interesting enough, only 20 penalty minutes in the NHL. So despite the over 200 that he had in the AHL, he had 20 penalty minutes throughout his tenure with the Vegas Golden Knights. And his plus minus, which I'm going to use Hockey Reference as my reference here, he had a plus minus of -2. So despite all the positive plus minuses he had in the Western Hockey League and in the AHL, that would be what his tenure was with the Vegas Golden Knights. And, like I said, moving forward, I hope that he does absolutely great. I always wish people like him the best. And it'll be curious to see how he does throughout his tenure with Calgary. But, yeah, so this is the Vegas Hockey Hub. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. And I just wanted to say goodbye to Brayden Pachal for him getting claimed on waivers by the Calgary Flames. And I wish him the absolute best. And, until next time, I'm your host, Ian Rachiele, and let's have a good one.
PR Connections Radio thanks you for watching this podcast. Check out more episodes of this show and our others at prconnectionsradio.com.